We have a problem here. We have a hijacked aircraft headed towards New York.
We don't know who he is. We're just picking him up now.
No, this is not an exercise manifest.
In April 2002, Al Jazeera reporter Yosri Fouda conducted the first and only interview with the two main planners of the September 11th attacks. Fouda was blindfolded and taken to a hideaway somewhere in Karachi, Pakistan, where he met Khalid Sheikh Mohamad and Ramzi bin al-Shibh. In the interview, he obtained the first full admission by al-Qaeda that they had carried out the 9/11 attacks. The videotapes were kept by al-Qaeda, but Fouda eventually received an audio CD of his interview with bin al-Shibh. Based on exclusive information from that interview, Top Secret was able to track the movements and preparations of the hijackers in the countdown to their mission of death. It became apparent how much the United States failed to detect and prevent what al-Qaeda called its planes operation, which was executed with such deadly effect on 9/11. In the summer of 1998, bomb attacks on the U.S. embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam killed over 200 people. The attacks brought Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda to international attention for the first time. In Nairobi, the Americans captured a Saudi who was involved in the attacks, Mohamad al-Awhali.
That we end up getting Mr. Al-Awhali, and Mr. Al-Awhali is then interviewed by a couple of agents, a New York City police detective and a New York FBI agent. And he gives up a telephone number. And what is that telephone number? This is the number that Mr. Al-Awhali called in Sana'a because he wanted travel documents and he wanted money.
The Yemen telephone number belonged to a man who lived in this street in the capital, Sana'a. The man's son-in-law was Khalid al-Mihdar, who was to become one of the 9/11 hijackers involved in the plot from the very beginning.
So from August of 1998 until the events of 9/11, and probably beyond that, the United States government is in possession of a telephone number that is part, you would argue, part of an al-Qaeda cell or a support network in Yemen. And we know, in retrospect, that that telephone number is significant in terms of 9/11.
The telephone number was monitored, and over a year later, through this eavesdropping, the Americans got wind of preparations for a top al-Qaeda meeting in Malaysia.
CIA intercepts discussions about this meeting that's planned, and they begin an operation to conduct surveillance of the operation in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, that there's going to be this meeting.
At the request of the CIA, the Malaysian Special Branch, based here in this building, kept an eye on the al-Qaeda operatives and even photographed them. The meeting was held in this suburb of Kuala Lumpur in January 2000. The meeting in this apartment block involved men who were planning to launch devastating attacks on the U.S. Khalid al-Mihdar and fellow Saudi Nawaf al-Hazmi were at the meeting. They were to be the first two recruits for the planes operation, which became the attacks on 9/11. Tawfiq bin Atash was also there. He was to mastermind the attack on the USS Cole in Yemen later that year. 9/11 masterminds Khalid Sheikh Mohamad and Ramzi bin al-Shibh were also thought to be at the meeting. The Malaysians remained tight-lipped about the cooperation they offered the Americans.
The Malaysian government was asked by the American government to monitor the meetings.
Well, I suppose maybe we'll cut this off, I think.
Okay.
We don't think we should mention.
Okay, we'll.
When the Al-Qaeda summit ended, the attendees dispersed. The official 9/11 Commission report claims American intelligence then lost track of the Al-Qaeda operatives after they departed Kuala Lumpur. Having been under close surveillance, the Al-Qaeda men boarded planes and seemingly disappeared into thin air.
Given the sophisticated nature of the American government and the American apparatus, CIA, FBI, and its excellent cooperation with Thai government, the Philippines government, and most governments in Southeast Asia, it seems a little bit, it's enigmatic. It's kind of mysterious how, this came about, that suddenly they were not able to be monitored.
Losing Mehdar and Hazmi was a critical security lapse, since after the meeting in Malaysia, the two Al-Qaeda operatives left Kuala Lumpur for the United States. The 2 point men in the planes operation touched down in California in January 2000. They arrived undetected, even though days earlier they had been under surveillance at the request of the CIA. The two Al-Qaeda men entered the USA with their own passports and with multiple entry visas.
This issue of the phone number in Sana'a, the summit in Malaysia, Khalid al-Midhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, and the multiple entry visas is what 9/11 is all about.
In California, Mehdar and Hazmi posed as Saudi students. They regularly attended this mosque in Los Angeles. The two men soon made a friend. In a restaurant near the mosque, they met a fellow Saudi. His name was Omar al-Bayoumi. He helped the two new arrivals to settle in California. We did our research into Bayoumi. He seemed to have close connections with the Saudi consulate in LA, and some in the Muslim community there suspected he was a Saudi government agent. One evening, Bayoumi showed up at the Medina Mosque in San Diego with Mehdar and Hazmi. He introduced them to a young Yemeni man named Mohtar Abdullah. Abdullah now lives back in Yemen, but he still remembers the two men he met at the mosque.
He introduced them to me as students or visitors who had just arrived in San Diego from LA, looking for somewhere to study. He asked me to try and help them find a school to learn English. He thought I could help them enroll somewhere.
And did you help them?
To a degree, yes.
Although they had been tracked in Kuala Lumpur at the Al-Qaeda meeting, Mehdar and Hazmi lived openly in San Diego. For a while, they lived in a small flat in this apartment complex. Nobody seems to have been on their trail. They weren't exactly hiding. The San Diego phone directory of 2000 even includes Hazmi's name, address, and telephone number.
If you have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on your side, don't worry. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of you.
Mehdar and Hazmi frequented this mosque in San Diego, where they listened to the sermons of a mosque imam, Anwar Awlaki. We have obtained a recording of one of Imam Awlaki's sermons. It offers an insight into his belief.
If you have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on your side, don't worry. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of you. It's not a matter of numbers or weapons or air force or artillery or battalions. If you have Allah with you, Allah will help you.
The official 9/11 Commission investigation wanted to interview this imam, but claimed in their report they were unable to locate and interview him. We found Awlaki in Sana'a. He had been deported from the US in early 2002. He offered us his own view of why 9/11 happened.
And we also believe, through our reading of the Quran, that any nation that is unjust or pompous and does not believe in Allah Almighty, Allah the Almighty will send them signs like those sent to the people of Ad and those sent to the pharaohs. There were 9 clear signs, and it is as if the signs grow in number each time tyranny in a certain state or regime grows.
Incredible as it sounds, Mehtar and Hazmi rented a room in the house of an FBI informant in San Diego. The informant's name was Abdul Sattar Sheikh, a Muslim of Indian descent who lived in this street with his 2 Saudi tenants. We located his house here. We tried, but failed, to get an interview with him. Hardly surprising, since even the first Congressional Joint Inquiry into 9/11 was denied access to Sheikh. Their live-in landlord was ideally placed to provide a lot of details on his 2 tenants.
There were some of the congressional investigators who felt that he knew more than he was letting on. But the FBI was very protective of him. They refused to let him be questioned directly by congressional investigators. The 9/11 Commission itself looked at the issue and concluded that he was not aware of the activities of his 2 guests, al-Madar and al-Hazmi.
2 days after 9/11, so on September 13th, a communication comes in from the San Diego FBI office, which provides a lot of information about both of those gentlemen and what they were doing in terms of computers that they might have been using, what locations they might have went to, the fact that they had purchased a car, the fact that they had gotten into a traffic accident, what ATMs they might have been going to, what phone booths they might have been using. So there was a lot of information that came in very soon thereafter. And that only suggests to me that the Bureau was successful in finding somebody that knew what these guys were doing. I mean, you can't get all that information within 2 days without somebody pinpointing it and saying, listen, this is what they did, this is where they went, this is what they drove.
In May 2000, Khalid al-Mehtar and Nawaf al-Hazmi began searching for flight schools. Luckily for them, the owner of this school spoke some Arabic. But both students were seen as a joke, since they wanted to bypass primary training on smaller planes.
I remember exactly his face. He came around and told me, like, with a hand and with his smile, he said, I want to fly Boeing. I said, yeah, everybody wants to fly Boeing. That was Nawaf who spoke more. And later on, really, they were in touch with Rick Garza.
As a matter of fact, they kind of pleaded with me, you know, please keep us on, and, you know, we'd like to move up into the Twins. Can we start flying in the Twins? And at that point, I thought it was a little comical because they didn't understand or grasp the concept of how flight training progresses.
Neither Mehtar or Hazmi ended up piloting a plane on 9/11. Giving up on learning to fly, Mehtar decided to return to Yemen in June 2000 to see his newborn baby daughter. Mehtar went back to his family house in this street in Sana'a, the house with the telephone number which had been bugged by the Americans. Mehtar spent much of his time in this small mosque, leading the prayers. To those who knew him, his views were unequivocal.
I remember he once said that it was permissible to kill civilians. We were talking about the hostages who were killed in Yemen in 1998 or 99. I don't remember how the conversation started, but I do specifically remember this much. Khalid said their killing was permissible.
With Mehdar gone, Hazmi began to feel increasingly lonely in San Diego. Having no work, nothing to study, and with his close companion gone, Hazmi decided to work in this gas station, washing cars alongside his friend, Mokhtar Abdallah. Hazmi remained in San Diego for the rest of 2000. He awaited the arrival of a fellow conspirator, a third team member, also a Saudi who would be more skilled in flying. But a few months before his arrival, al-Qaeda struck again, in dramatic fashion, against an American target. In October 2000, suicide bombers hit the USS Cole destroyer while it was moored in the port of Aden in Yemen. 17 American sailors were killed. U.S. diplomats, politicians, FBI officials, and CIA agents descended on Yemen to join the hunt for the perpetrators. The U.S. forged new alliances as it sought to combat the growing threat posed by al-Qaeda.
I consider the USS Cole incident in Aden as the event which opened the door to development of Yemeni-American relations within the framework of combating terrorism.
And what mechanisms were agreed in the context of the war on terror?
Mechanisms in terms of how to build the Yemeni capabilities in combating terrorism.
So a dialogue was established, and Yemen, like other countries, provided the Americans with useful information.
Of course, there was the exchange of intelligence information between Yemen and the USA and a number of countries, not only the USA.
Beyond the handshakes and backslapping, there was little progress. The mastermind of the USS Cole attack had been photographed at the Kuala Lumpur meeting earlier that year. Also photographed at that meeting was Khalid al-Mehdar, who was now back in Yemen in the very same city as these American investigators. The dots were never joined. The Americans failed to find a smoking gun, and in the end, there was no U.S. military retaliation.
You know, when historians examine 9/11, the USS Cole is really the curtain raiser for 9/11. And the fact that the United States government did absolutely nothing about it, I mean, is astonishing. You know, famously, Ambassador Michael Sheehan, who was the counterterrorism head at State Department, after the Cole attack said, what do they have to do? Blow up the Pentagon?
The new member of the hijack team arrived in San Diego in December 2000, 2 months after the USS Cole attack. His name was Hani Hanjour. He would pilot the plane that hit the Pentagon. Hanjour had studied English here at the University of Arizona in Tucson in 1991. Some important al-Qaeda members had studied here, and by the mid-90s, Tucson had become a hotbed of radical Islamic activity. At this time, a number of Muslims were taking flying lessons at various schools in Arizona, including Hanjour. This activity caught the attention of Harry Ellen, a businessman in Phoenix, Arizona, who was also an FBI operative. Ellen felt there should be an investigation into Middle Eastern men learning to fly. In 1996, he reportedly passed on his concerns to an agent in this FBI office in Phoenix. Ellen's handler was FBI agent Ken Williams. It appears Williams did nothing with the information until 5 years later. Only then, in July 2001, did Williams send what came to be known as the Phoenix Memo to FBI headquarters and the New York office. The Phoenix Memo suggested the FBI should monitor Arab students training at aviation schools in Arizona. But according to the official 9/11 Commission report, nobody at the FBI offices saw the Phoenix Memo until after September 11th. Had the memo's recommendations been acted on, the preparations for the 9/11 attacks might well have been uncovered. It seems that no sooner had Hanjour arrived in San Diego, he and Hazmi planned to move to another town. First, they passed by the gas station, so Hazmi could say goodbye to his colleague, Mukhtar Abdallah.
Suddenly, he came to see me at the shop. It was about 9 p.m. and he was on his way to San Francisco, Oakland to be specific.
مدينة سان فرانسيسكو أوكلاند بالتحديد على ما ذكر لي هو.
وحده? Alone?
He had someone with him.
Who?
كما ذكر لي أنه يلقب بهاني الحنجور.
As he said, his name was Hani Hanjour.
Saudi?
Yes, he said he was Saudi and that they were childhood friends.
And he introduced him as?
صديق.
He introduced him as a friend who came to San Diego to visit. And when I asked Hanjour whether he had been in America for long, he said, I was in Arizona and my job is a pilot.
في ولاية أريزونا ومهنتي هي طيار.
The manner in which Hazmi said goodbye to Abdallah was more significant than his friend realized at the time.
He said, we will meet again with permission of Allah, if not in this life, then in the next, in eternal paradise. Then he shook my hand.
Here in Hamburg, Germany, another important element of the 9/11 story was developing. Some of the key players in the 9/11 plot lived in this flat. Mohamad Atta lived here while studying in Hamburg. He would pilot the first plane that hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Marwan al-Sheikh was his flatmate. He would pilot the second plane that hit the South Tower. 9/11 mastermind Ramzi bin al-Shibh was also a flatmate here. Ziad Jarrah, who piloted Flight 93, which crashed in Pennsylvania, lived close by. Between them, they would become known as the Hamburg Cell. We obtained a copy of Mohamad Atta's bank statement, which showed that he called his rented flat in Hamburg Dar al-Ansar, meaning the place of those who follow the Prophet Muhammad, an indication of his allegiance to Islam, even in his everyday life. German intelligence was closely watching the Muslim community here in Hamburg. A mosque in this building was a favorite place for the community's more radical members. We obtained this footage from 1999, filmed inside the mosque, showing Ramzi bin al-Shibh addressing a group of guests at a wedding reception. Here we see pilot hijacker Ziad Jarrah, who was also at the wedding. And Marwan al-Sheikh, another of the pilot hijackers, can be seen here on the far right, singing of past Muslim victories.
So in the year 1999 and the year 2000, at least for a couple of months, several members of the Hamburg cell were under surveillance in Hamburg, but German authorities didn't realize what they were looking at. They didn't get any information that seemed to be threatening in any way, so they decided after a couple of months to stop the surveillance because it was just taking too much personnel from their resources.
In the early summer of 2000, Mohamad Atta, Marwan al-Sheikh, and Ziad Jarrah arrived in the U.S. Atta and Sheikh attended flight school in Venice on the western coast of Florida. Just down the road, Ziad Jarrah was also accepted by this school in the same street. Unlike the first two al-Qaeda operatives in San Diego, these flight students proved to be more proficient. Jarrah impressed the flight instructor of this aviation center in Philadelphia, where he later trained. Jarrah had requested to fly the Hudson Corridor, which runs along Manhattan Island.
And the VFR Hudson Corridor comes right up the New York skyline with the Hudson River. And it's for aircraft that want to fly below 1,000 feet. And it's kind of unusual for a person to come in that is not familiar with the area to have such an explicit knowledge on that one part. So he had done his homework, and he knew that this corridor would give him a great view of the Manhattan skyline, which obviously became the focal point of 9/11.
In January 2001, Mohamad Atta traveled to Germany to meet with his former flatmate, Ramzi bin al-Shibh. Bin al-Shibh had been declined a visa for the U.S. He was coordinating the operation from Germany. Atta debriefed bin al-Shibh on the operation's progress. Bin al-Shibh then went to Afghanistan to report to the al-Qaeda leadership. After his meeting with bin al-Shibh, Mohamad Atta returned to Florida. Marwan Sheikh also returned to Florida after having been away in Morocco. Neither man had a valid visa, yet both persuaded U.S. immigration inspectors to admit them back into the country so they could continue their flight training. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, the rest of the hijackers were being selected. This exclusive footage shows at least 3 of the men chosen as the muscles, the men who would subdue the plane crew and passengers. In the exclusive interview with Ramzi bin al-Shibh, he explained that recruits were not told their targets, but knew they were to die.
First, all the brothers knew they were going on a martyrdom operation, and they were all prepared for this. They were not told of the details, such as where, how, and when. It would not have been wise for any brother to know the details of the whole operation when he was still in Afghanistan.
Before departing to the land of their enemy, some of the hijackers videotaped their wills, some of which were released later by al-Qaeda's media wing. In the videos, the hijackers rail against the United States and its policies. This is Ahmed al-Haznawi, one of the hijackers of Flight 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania. This is Abdul Aziz al-Omari, one of the hijackers of Flight 11, which hit the World Trade Center. This is Saeed al-Ghamdi, one of the hijackers of Flight 93. In April 2001, these muscle hijackers began arriving in America. At first, they rented rooms in cheap motels, such as this one in Florida. With 18 operatives on the ground in the U.S., the details of the plane's operation could be worked out more precisely. Ringleader Mohamad Atta worked on selecting 4 morning flights that would all take off around the same time. Atta and his team would hijack American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston's Logan Airport. Their target was the North Tower of the World Trade Center, which they codenamed the Faculty of Town Planning. Marwan Sheikh and his team would hijack United Airlines Flight 175, also from Boston's Logan Airport. Their target was the South Tower, codenamed the Faculty of Urban Planning. Hani Hanjour and his team would hijack American Airlines Flight 77 from Dulles Airport near Washington. Their target was the Pentagon, which they codenamed the Faculty of Fine Arts. Ziad Jarrah and his team would hijack United Airlines Flight 93 from Newark Airport. Their target was the Congress on Capitol Hill, codenamed the Faculty of Law. On August 25th, the first of the 19 tickets were purchased. The 0 hour was set for September 11th. Ramzi bin al-Shibh was at this time still in Germany. On August 29th, he was awakened before dawn by a phone call from Mohamad Atta.
He said, 2 sticks, a dash, and a cake with a stick down it. What is it? I said. Is this a riddle? Are you waking me up to tell me a riddle? The 2 sticks is the number 11, a dash is a dash, and the cake with a stick down it is the number 9. Thus, the picture is complete. 9/11, the 11th of September.
فتكتمل الصورة 11/9.
The date was set. Osama bin Laden was about to stage a devastating strike against his enemy. Years earlier, the United States might have possibly prevented the 9/11 attacks had it not squandered golden opportunities to capture or kill bin Laden himself. One of the first opportunities arose back in 1997, here in southern Afghanistan, when some local Afghan tribesmen had agreed to take part in a raid on bin Laden's base. Everything had been well planned, according to one of the operation's masterminds.
We had gone so far as to take a look at that compound, understood where he was, because there was a series of 3 houses. His family and extended family and key operatives were there. He was in the middle house. That's what we were going after. And that we would have done something. If he had survived the attack, then we would have taken him to a remote location, and that we would have flown in and arrested bin Laden.
In the end, a political decision was taken not to go ahead with the operation. 2 years later, in 1999, American intelligence located someone they believed to be bin Laden in his customary white robe. We obtained this footage of Osama bin Laden taken by a CIA spy drone. The U.S. military was ready to conduct a targeted missile strike. The footage reveals how close the Americans came to killing the al-Qaeda leader 2 years before the September 11th attacks.
Among them, one very much taller than the other. But you know, that's what you can see, that he's taller and they're smaller, right? So you can take the chance, all right, we're going to fire into this group, and maybe there's nobody, maybe it's just a tall man, right? Maybe we don't care, but we'll just kill them all? No, somebody decided, in fact, that that was not a good idea. It wasn't worth taking the risk.
If it had gone ahead, it would have killed bin Laden. There was no question about it. But the White House delayed long enough in making a decision where it was no longer possible to do it by the time they decided that they could go ahead.
Whether or not these would be successful operations if they had been authorized, I don't know. It's very difficult to judge from the outside. But it's clear that there was a certain amount of frustration among the operational people at CIA that the political leadership, including some of the political leaders inside the CIA, were very reluctant to undertake any kind of action whatsoever.
Neither the Clinton nor the Bush administration seemed to grasp the full extent of the threat posed by Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda. Every morning, CIA Director George Tenet delivered a Presidential Daily Briefing, or PDB, to President George Bush. From late January 2001 to the day of 9/11 itself, more than 40 PDBs were delivered which warned of a possible al-Qaeda attack. In his own words, George Tenet's system at the time was blinking red. On August 6th, the president was shown, during his holiday, what was arguably the most alarming CIA report about al-Qaeda to date. The daily brief was entitled, "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S."
President Bush then went back to his vacation after getting this PDB. And Condoleezza Rice and he didn't speak, and Tenet, I think, talked to him once. So they all went, it was August, they all went on vacation, which I thought was kind of an odd response.
Later, the president's national security advisor at the time, Condoleezza Rice, had to take the hot seat before the 9/11 Commission to explain why nothing more had been done.
Threat reporting is, we believe that something is going to happen here at this time, under these circumstances. This was not threat reporting.
Well, actionable intelligence, Dr. Rice, is when you have the place, time, and date. The threat reporting saying the United States is going to be attacked should trigger the principals getting together to say we're going to do something about this.
Mr. Rummer, let's be very clear. The PDB does not say the United States is going to be attacked. It says bin Laden would like to attack the United States. I don't think you frankly had to have that report to know that bin Laden would like to attack the United States.
So why aren't you doing something about that earlier than August 6th?
The threat reporting to which we could respond.
It should have triggered really loud alarm bells from President Bush and his top advisors about the need to shake the trees, as it were, and go out and look for anything, have the agencies, the FBI and the CIA, look for anything that might be indications of a plot to attack in the United States. And that clearly was not done.
One man who was well aware of the al-Qaeda threat was then National Coordinator for Counterterrorism, Richard Clark. Appointed by President Bill Clinton, Clark had a hard time convincing the new Bush administration to take al-Qaeda seriously. On May 29, 2001, he wrote to Deputy National Security Advisor Stephen Hadley, stating, "When these attacks occur, as they likely will, we will wonder what more could have been done to stop them." In the new Bush administration, Clark was effectively demoted. It was only in the 9/11 Commission hearings, 2.5 years after the attacks, when Clark could be brutally frank.
I also welcome the hearings because it is finally a forum where I can apologize to the loved ones of the victims of 9/11, to them who are here in the room, to those who are watching on television. Your government failed you. Those entrusted with protecting you failed you. And I failed you. We tried hard, but that doesn't matter because we failed.
Such failure may be even harder to understand in the light of what 9/11 mastermind Ramzi bin al-Shibh told us. He claimed the al-Qaeda operatives were tailed as they took their surveillance flights prior to 9/11.
For instance, brothers Marwan and Ziad were tailed as they took their casing flights from New York to California. This continued throughout the whole journey, but Allah saved them.
واستمرت مراقبة رجال الأمن لهم طوال وقت الرحلة ولكن الله سلم.
Bin al-Shibh does not specify who might have been doing the following. It may have been nothing more than paranoia on the part of the al-Qaeda operatives. But Herb Hortman, a flight instructor of Ziad Jarrah, confirmed to us that the hijacker had in fact been under surveillance. After 9/11, Hortman was visited by some FBI agents. They told him they had been tailing Jarrah before 9/11.
They said they had been tracking him and actually had just lost track of him just prior to 9/11. The indications were that we had gotten that they actually had been following a group of these people and had lost touch with them through whatever reason. But they had tracked them back to us. And when I went back and looked at the pictures, then I immediately recognized them at that point.
The FBI may not have been the only ones tracking the hijackers. Some media reports claimed an Israeli spy ring operating across America had been following at least 4 members of the hijack gang, including its leader, Mohamad Atta. These reports remain unverified, but according to a former intelligence official, it is an open secret that Israeli agents pay close attention to Islamists in the USA.
Did the Israelis have a large intelligence operation in the United States, particularly in the New York, New Jersey area? The answer is yes, they did. They have operations that they conduct against radical Islamists in the United States, but they did not, and there has been no evidence shown that they had advanced knowledge of 9/11.
On June 11, 2001, a CIA delegation visited the FBI office here in New York. At the meeting, the CIA agents presented some of the surveillance photographs taken from the meeting in Kuala Lumpur a year and a half earlier. One of the photos was of Khalid al-Mehdar. The photographs caused an argument between the FBI and the Central Intelligence Agency.
The people that were in the meeting on the FBI side said, well, where'd you get these photographs? And the people in the agency said, well, we can't tell you. It led to a real disagreement. I mean, strong words were exchanged because the men and women who were looking at these photographs understood what it was.
Greater information sharing between the CIA and FBI would have put Khalid al-Mehdar on the radar there and then. in June 2001. As it was, Mehdar's name was not added to the watch list until over 2 months after that meeting. This was a critical lapse because during this time, Mehdar re-entered the United States unchecked. From the time he left San Diego, Mehdar had been in Yemen. Mehdar now sought to return to the U.S. to join the hijack team. He received a new U.S. visa 2 days after the CIA-FBI meeting in New York. He flew into the U.S. on the 4th of July, 2001, Independence Day, when security is theoretically on high alert. Mehdar joined 6 other hijackers living in this house in Paterson, New Jersey. They all shared a one-room apartment on the top floor. Mehdar reunited here with Nawaf al-Hazmi, his former colleague in San Diego. Pilot hijacker Hani Hanjour was also in the house, together with 4 of the so-called muscle hijackers. Mehdar and Hazmi were eventually put on the U.S. National Watch List on August 24th. An urgent search for the 2 men would have uncovered 7 of the al-Qaeda operatives living here in the same house. They all lived here openly, under their real names, which they used to open bank accounts, obtain driving licenses, enroll in flight schools, and to book plane tickets. As it was, just one rookie FBI agent was assigned the task of finding Mehdar and Hazmi. There were yet more security failings in the countdown to 9/11. In February 2001, Zacharias Moussaoui, a French-Moroccan citizen, arrived in the U.S. to seek flight training on large Boeing jets, even though he had no prior aviation knowledge. 3 weeks before the 9/11 attacks, Moussaoui was arrested after FBI agents in Minnesota became suspicious about his wish to learn to fly large jets. As it was, FBI headquarters denied the field agents permission to search Moussaoui's laptop computer after the arrest. Later on, the chief counsel of the FBI's Minneapolis field office, Colleen Rowley, wrote a stinging memo to the FBI director, outlining how FBI headquarters had thwarted agents' attempts to investigate Moussaoui. Rowley believes the 9/11 plot might have been derailed had the Moussaoui investigation not been blocked by bureaucratic procedure.
There are often cases where agents want to pursue cases more aggressively and are either hampered or perhaps reined back in by prosecutors who want a high level, a high standard of evidence before proceeding. Now, at the early stages of investigation, of course, you're never going to have that. And so there's this tension between what the prosecutor wants, which is eventually having a case with a high level of evidence, and an investigator who might want to start with a lower threshold.
The plot remained undetected, and in the final days, according to Ramzi bin al-Shibh, he and Mohamad Atta bade farewell to each other over the telephone with typical religious fervor.
He reassured me that, God willing, we will meet in paradise, and that our meeting shall be soon with permission of Allah. I asked him that if he saw the Prophet Muhammad, to convey our greetings to him.
إذا رأى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وبلغ المنازل العلى في الجنة أن يبلغه منا السلام.
According to bin al-Shibh, the final hours were the most critical for the hijackers to remain focused and determined.
These were very apprehensive moments, for you are going into battle, a very large military battle by any standards, an unconventional battle against the most powerful force on Earth, which has all kinds of weapons, intelligence agencies, and spy satellites. You are facing them on their own soil, among their own forces, with a small company of 19 young men.
15 hours before the 0 hour, lead hijacker Mohamad Atta drove 100 miles north from Boston to Portland, Maine, with fellow hijacker Abdul Aziz Al-Omari. Their apparent plan was to then fly back to Boston, knowing that transit passengers are not usually subjected to rigorous security checks. This CCTV image shows Atta and Omari checking in at Portland Airport at 5:45 a.m. to catch their flight to Boston.
It's almost impossible to believe something as important as that flight that day. He would be in September, 120 miles away by airplane, in the kind of weather where there's fogs and you could maybe not make it. It seemed very risky. I was fascinated by that. But it could be that, you know, they were just as amateurish as we were in their planning. I don't see a lot of sophistication in this. I think it's much more amateurish.
Yet these were the amateurs whom America's intelligence agencies had failed to detect. With all the hijackers checking in, the last chance to prevent the attacks now hinged on the airport security. This CCTV footage from Dulles Airport captures the Flight 77 team at the security check. The hijackers were carrying short-bladed knives.
3 of the 5 hijackers alarmed the primary metal detector. Those 3 going through the secondary metal detector, 2 of them alarmed the metal detector, 1 at thigh level and 1 at ankle level. The screener with a hand wand did not adequately resolve those alarms. A significant failure.
Another failure to add to the string of intelligence and security lapses which meant al-Qaeda was able to carry out its deadly operation. This is Khalid al-Madar, the man photographed over a year and a half earlier at the al-Qaeda meeting in Kuala Lumpur, now captured on camera once again, walking to board the plane. The 4 aircraft took off that morning. Al-Qaeda's planes operation was carried out, and the world witnessed a catastrophic attack that would have profound consequences which are still with us to this day.